Alright guys, so this is your lesson on the different types of fossils. So what I want you to do with this is treat it just like we would if we had bell riders your class. I want you to try and answer these 3 questions on your own. If you don't know anything, that's perfectly fine, but I want you to pause the video for a second and think about how you would answer these 3 questions. Alright, now that you've had a chance to answer those 3 questions, let's talk about this. Alright, so share a little bit about what you know about fossils already. We will talk about this in class, so whatever you got, you've probably learned this in 4th and 5th grade. It just remains from something that used to live on Earth. And the second one says, are there different types of fossils? Of course there are. There's a bunch of them. We're going to talk about those today, and I'm going to give you some examples. All right, and number 3, have you ever seen a fossil in person? I feel like most of you had said yes, maybe. Some of you probably said no, but if you have picked up a shark's tooth off of the beach, one of them that's not white, those are actually fossilized. The white ones are still like teeth, they're not fossilized, but if they are black colored or really dark gray, or they have like a different colors to them, they're not one solid color, then they are fossilized. Now, you might find some that are somewhere between white and yellow. That's just natural discoloration that happens to a shark tooth as the shark eats. Kind of like sometimes our teeth will get yellow. So that's not what I'm talking about. If you've ever found one that's really dark or got like shades of gray or brown mixed in with it, that is a fossil. Okay? So now let's talk about these types of fossils. All right. So a lot of you have seen Jurassic Park. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of class. We'll talk about what they tried to do, whether that's possible, anything like that, okay? All right, so the first type of fossil is a mold fossil. So sediments bury an organism, the sediments become stone around the organism, and the organism decays, leaving behind a hole in the shape of that organism. So if we think about a mold fossil, it would be kind of like a cake pan, okay? So if you've ever had a bundt pan, it would look almost like this. So it is a depression left in the rock that's in the shape of that creature or in the shape of that shell. Right, a cast fossil forms when that mold is then filled with sediments that'll harden into the shape of that organism. So it's not always going to be with a shell, but this is one of the easiest examples I could find. So this right here is sand that is filled inside of a shell, and the shell got tossed around in the ocean. The shell has actually been broken off of the rock. So what we're left with is a cast of the inside of that shell. Right, the next kind of fossil is a petrified or permineralized fossil. So this is one of those fossils that has 2 names. It depends on who you talk to as to what they're going to call it, but both names are correct. That's petrified or permineralized. Right, this forms when minerals soak into the buried remains and replace them, turning them into rock. So that's what happens to those shark's teeth. Those shark's teeth that are black or really dark and gray and have kind of some brown mixed in with it, those have actually been replaced by minerals. They have soaked into the tooth and it is no longer made out of enamel and all that other stuff. It is now officially made out of rock instead of being made out of the same things our teeth are made out of. One of the easiest examples to talk about when we talk about petrified is to talk about petrified wood. So this is or was a slice out of a tree trunk, and the minerals have soaked into it and replaced the parts and pieces of that tree. It's still got the same shape and the same structure as the tree did, but it is now made out of rock because the minerals have soaked into it and replaced it. So you can still see the rough edge where the bark would have been, and you can still see the rings inside of that tree slice. Right, the next kind of fossil is a preserved fossil. This is the one that we talk about when we talk about Jurassic Park. Okay, so a preserved fossil forms when an entire organism or part of that organism is prevented from decaying by being trapped in rock, ice, tar, or amber. All right, so if you have seen Jurassic Park, if you remember what they talked about, they found a mosquito. This is a spider trapped in amber here. But on the movie Jurassic Park, they found a mosquito trapped in amber, and the mosquito had bitten a dinosaur, and it had dinosaur blood inside of it. So they used the DNA from that mosquito to try and recreate dinosaurs, and that's where Jurassic Park came from. Now, that is technically not possible because the DNA would not have survived that long, even preserved inside of that amber, but it's an interesting idea. Okay. Now, a carbonized fossil. A carbonized fossil forms when organism or parts of that organism are pressed between mud or clay that hardens and leaves only the carbon imprint of the organism behind. So, this would be almost like a tattoo or a drawing, and it would look like a painting. It is not going to be 3D, it's not going to be raised out of the rock, and it is not going to be pressed down into the rock. You're only left with a shadow. So, if you draw something on a piece of paper, that's what this would feel like. You would not be able to feel where that fossil is. So it is seriously just the carbon left behind. So it's kind of like somebody painted on the rock or drew on the rock or even like a tattoo. You're not going to be able to feel this fossil. You'll have to be able to see that kind of fossil. All right, trace fossils form when mud or sand hardens to stone where a footprint, trail, scap, or burrow of an organism is left behind. So this is a fossil of not the organism itself, not the creature, but something that was left behind by the creature. So if you think about when we talk about like CSI or when they're doing crime scene investigations, they're looking for traces left by that person that committed the crime. So that's kind of what we talk about when we talk about trace fossils. Is something that creature would have left behind that gives us clues to what that creature was or what their life was like. The same way we talk about when we talk about CSI. All right, so this trace fossil is footprints from some kind of creature with really, really long toenails, looks like. I I don't know what kind of creature that would be, but it's just the footprints of that creature. The foot is not there, the bones are not there. It is just footprints left where the creature walked. All right? So now we've talked about fossils of different kinds of creatures and all kinds of different animals, and I showed you a spider, and we talked about trees being fossilized. I showed you leaves that were fossilized. Now we have to acknowledge that people can also be fossilized. All right. So when we talk about mummies, those are fossilized. And we have natural mummies and we have what we consider man made mummies. So the mummies that were deliberately mummified, say in Egypt, that are in the pyramids, we call those man made mummies because somebody purposely dressed that body and helped preserve that body so that it would still be here. But this one right here, this man was found in Siberia. So he was found in a really, really cold mountain range. He was actually frozen up there. It's not clear how he died necessarily. Um, they've done some research and looked into it, but I don't know that there is a definitive answer. But if you look at this man, he was so well preserved by the ice that even his tattoos, this one right here near his hip, that one was preserved, and there's one on his wrist right here. He probably has more, but even his skin is so well preserved that his tattoos are still there. So when we talk about fossils, we're not just talking about bones that are left behind. Sometimes we can find entire creatures in ice or in amber or something like that. We can find an entire creature and even see sometimes what's in their stomach and see what they ate. So we learn a whole lot from things that are preserved, things that we would never be able to find otherwise, things that are from so long ago that it's just not possible. Um, but because of fossils, we're able to learn about that history that happened a super long time ago. Right. The next thing we talked about Pompeii already. We talked about how these people were killed by the volcano, but these are fossils. They have been fossilized. They've been left behind, and we can learn about not just their life, but also that natural disaster because of where they were. Okay, and I'm not going to talk about this one forever because we talked about it in class already. All right, the next thing. So we talk about fossils. We talk about these creatures we can find. We find some creatures that are really strange or some really huge creatures sometimes. So we've talked about megalodons a little bit. I know some of my classes asked about them. Um, but megalodons were basically giant sharks. So if you've ever seen the movie Jaws, I know that's a bit of an old movie, but if you've ever seen the old movie Jaws where they talk about the biggest great white ever, that's who Jaws is. That is a scale version of Jaws inside Megalodon's teeth. Okay? So that is a Megalodon jawbone, and this is the shark jaws, like from that movie. inside of a megalodon jaw. So a megalodon could have eaten Jaws in one bite, like a mini muffin, just popped in his mouth and that's it. Okay, so when we talk about some of these creatures that used to be here, we're finding all kinds of really neat things and really scary things. I'm not sure that if megalodons were around still that I would feel comfortable going out on a boat in the middle of the ocean. I don't like being out where I can't see land anyways. But still, if we're talking about Jaws, that big great white shark being able to be eaten by that megalodon, I might get stuck in his teeth. Like that's how big he was. Okay. And this right here, this is a woman that's probably around my height. I know some of you know how tall I am, but my virtual kids, she's about 5'8", 5'6", 5'8". She is standing inside of the megalodon's jaws. If she reached her hand up, she wouldn't even be able to reach those teeth. So again, megalodon could eat her whole, one bite and done. Okay. So when we talk about some of these creatures, we found some really, really cool things. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the interesting creatures that were in Earth's history a little bit later on.